path there. Can you see Natalie? Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, excellent.
Super.
Let me know
Thank
when
you
you
so
want me
much.
to move to the next slide.
Well, thank you for extending the invitation, Esmarie, and thank you to everyone attending today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about. Actually, I'm not going to talk about my research on Louisiana, but if you have questions, maybe we can keep them for the end. I'm going to talk today about a segment of the research that I'm conducting right now on the United Kingdom, and especially on Cardiff. You can go to the next slide, please. Just before we started, I have to acknowledge who's paying me. So my research is, so I'm a postdoc at University of Liverpool, but my funding comes from Fonds de Recherche du Québec. It's a Quebec government research fellowship for 2 years. And they also funded part of my PhD. Thank you. Next, please. So the focus of the research, turn of the 20th century, and I specifically looked at two port cities, Liverpool and Cardiff, because they had a larger Black presence in the UK before the Windrush. And also for all sorts of reasons, I decided to look at those first because I was in Liverpool for a while, so it was easier to access the archives there. And also those two cities being ports, they have an historical Black presence because of the trade and the port, and we're going to see that the occupation of sailors, even though I'm focusing on women, it's still coming back in many of the stories that I'm gonna share with you today. So my research questions were around how Black women were treated in state institutions. How do they resist? What can we learn from institutional archives about Black women's lives? So not so much about what's going on between the penal system and them, but also more widely, what can we learn about their lives? And what can we learn about the social landscape for Black life from studying ordinary individuals? And here I put ordinary in quotation marks because, of course, those individuals were captured in the archives because they had extraordinary activities, for instance, criminal activities. So that makes them different from other Black women who would not have trouble with the law. But I think there's a lot to be learned from their stories. Next, please. So before we jump into history and the past, of course, the research questions come often from what we see in the present. So I thought it would be important to remind ourselves about what is the situation in present day United Kingdom. So I've used the terminology that people use. For instance, one of the most recent sources is the report that was made by David Lammy, the then MP in 2017. So we use the term Black, Asian, and minority ethnics. So men and women make up 25% of prisoners in today's UK versus 14% of the population. And the disproportionality is actually more pronounced in the UK than it is in the United States, where we know there's an overrepresentation of Black people in the carceral system, and it's been documented for a long time. If you look at young people in custody, it's that disproportionality is even higher than that. There's different examples here. Another source was talking about strip searches, which is one of police practices that is often denounced. So if we look at the London Metropolitan Police in 2021, white people constituted only 40% of all strip searches conducted on detainees, meaning that the remaining 60% were all conducted on people who actually form a minority of the population. So obviously the kind of departure for the research is that realization that today's situation is quite bad. It is quite bad in terms of overrepresentation in the carceral and the penal system in general. Next, please. So here I put some dates, some events related to Black history in the UK. The ones that are in bold are specifically around Cardiff. So you see that in 1881, there's a sailor rest, which is a housing accommodation, like a boarding house, sorry, for Black seamen open in Cardiff. And a few years after that, the African Training Institute was founded in Colwyn Bay by a white a white missionary who went to Africa and brought back some African students. The Seamen's Institute was formally opened in Cardiff in 1891, and the first floor was a church for seamen. And in 1917, the Coloured Cricket Club was founded in Cardiff. But next slide, please. The biggest event concerning Black history for the first decades of the 20th century, certainly the 1919 race riots, which happened in different towns around the UK. And in Cardiff, it happened in June, one full week of anti-Black rioting, where 3 people were killed. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the geography of Cardiff later, so maybe I can come back to the race riots when I talk about that. So these events were not related. They were not. There's no cause to consequence between what happened in South Shields, Cardiff, London, or Liverpool, but they all happened that same year, and they have common roots. 1919, of course, is the year after the end of the First World War. And the UK, Britain had mobilized a lot of troops from the empire. And those troops were stationed in the UK. So Black soldiers, for instance, from Jamaica they were not brought back to Jamaica after the war, but they had to be stationed in the UK before they could be repatriated, and in some cases, some decided to stay. But what the situation was that there were more Black people in the UK after the war than there was just before, because of the presence of Black soldiers coming back from the war. This created different situations, but I think what can explain the race riots was really a resentment from the white population against black soldiers for different justifications, if you will. And of course, one was employment, because after the war, the economy had to be reorganized, and there was a lack of employment for men coming back from war. So there was resentment against black sailors, for instance, from white sailors. But there was also another situation that had started way before the First World War, was the fact that black men coming to the UK would sometimes settle in Britain and form families with white women. And this was at the this really frustrated some white people. So it's a bit of a combination of economics and also the composition of the population, the fact that black soldiers were in numbers, and oftentimes those events, were kindled by individual interactions that kind of exploded, and mobs were formed, and people from minorities were attacked. So it was not only black people. For instance, in Cardiff, there was also a big population of Arabs from different countries, Yemen, Sudan, were already present in the city for a long time. But the kind of the context of the post-war created those scenes of violence on a more larger scale, I would say. So again, there didn't happen all at the same time around the UK, but that year, 1919, was so a lot of those happened. All of those events happened around the UK. And of course, if some of you know the history of the United States, you also know that in 1919 there were a lot of race riots in the United States for the same motives were invoked: the presence of black soldiers coming back from the war, and I think there's even a nickname for that here. There's a Red Summer. 1919 is called the Red Summer in the United States because of all the race riots that happened. The most serious one being in Chicago. Next, please. So coming back to my research on Black women, of course, the biggest challenge coming from the United States, where there's, especially in Louisiana, where there's a big black population, and it's very well documented what race people are. It's not the case at all in the United Kingdom, where institutions are colorblind, so they don't record ethnicity or race on anybody that who would be arrested or jailed. So I had to adopt two different strategies. One was the use of photographs, and the other one was the use of historical newspapers that have been digitized. And I'm gonna share stories that come from both those sources and explain a bit how I got there. So the photograph method, very problematic, of course. because there's a lot of ways to be black, and not everybody look black on a black and white picture from the turn of the 20th century. So it is a very how would I say, a very arbitrary method to decide who's black or who's not black. And I relies basically on stereotypes of what it is to look black. So I came to that method because some of the institutions had kept photographs in their records, which is kind of rare and precious. And also because I copied Caroline Bresset, who's a UK, a Black British geographer, who's done that kind of work in archives as well. She wrote several articles where she discussed her methodology. So I really encourage you, if you're curious about the methodology, to look her up and check her articles where she explains the pluses and minuses of that method. But what was the easiest, I guess. Could you go to the next slide, please? So, talking about Tiger Bay or Bute Town, it's the name of the neighborhood in Cardiff. So that neighborhood has changed a lot throughout times, and we'll see a map on the next slide. But this image is interesting because it's Sister Rosetta Thorpe, who was an African American singer, very famous, and she toured and came to Cardiff. So Cardiff in the 1950s was known for jazz, and in the period after the Second World War, there were still Black GIs stationed near Cardiff in different army camps, and they would go to Tiger Bay on their day off to go to jazz clubs. So there were local jazz musicians, but there was also he was also part of the circuit for touring African American jazz musicians to come to Cardiff, because there was a Black community pretty important in numbers and in concentration as well. So it was a very, very lively place. This picture was taken on London Square, which was kind of the heart of the community. He was bordered by Victorian houses that were when they were built, they were kind of higher class buildings. But eventually, with the development of Cardiff, those richer people left. But the square was important because it was where kids would play, people would meet. And these pictures is interesting because that American celebrity was there playing with the local children, and you can see from the pictures that those children were coming from very diverse background. Next slide, please. So this show you Tiger Bay before the map shows Tiger Bay before what they call the redevelopment of Bute Town. So you see, it was really an enclave between the town of Cardiff and the docks. And it was an enclave because there was a canal on north and west side, and on the east side, it was a railroad that was kind of the cut with the rest of the town, and bridges were separating Bute Town from the rest of Cardiff. So it was really an enclave. where sailors would be housed in boarding houses. There were a lot of pubs, a lot of grocery stores, and people from all around the globe would live there. The rest of Cardiff at the time was pretty white. Not that there was not white people living in Bute Town, but oftentimes they were part of mixed families. So this neighborhood was completely changed in the 1960s, and then there was another round of transformation in the 1980s, where they built big towers, housing projects. So not many of those streets are still around. Angelina Street is still around. So so I'm not, of course, I'm not Welsh, and I'm not an expert at all in Wales history. So pardon me if I make mistakes, but Bute Town is named after the Marquis of Bute, who had tremendous wealth because of the coal mining industry, and is the one who had the Cardiff Castle built for him. And the streets in Bute Town, several streets have names after his female relatives, so Angelina, Sophia, Maria, etc. So some of those streets are still there, but most of the housing has changed. The church is still there, and the square has been completely dismantled because there's big constructions that happened on the square. So the nature of the neighborhood really changed, and it's not anymore an enclave in Cardiff. The canal, the configuration of the canals, etc., have been changed. So it's much more integrated in the cities than it was before. I also there's also an arrow to show that on Bute Street there was a police station. So although people living in Tiger Bay, Bute Town were really kind of separated from the city, there was a police station directly in that neighborhood. And I think it's not innocent that he was there. You're going to see in the stories that I'm going to share that there was a lot of surveillance on individuals living in Tiger Bay. But also the nature of the fact that it was an enclave also played a great part in the race riots, because people were able to defend their neighborhood by protecting the bridges. And so that was an important aspect of the geography of how the race riot unfolded in Cardiff. Next slide, please. Sorry, it's a bit I realize it's a bit introduction. Sometimes I'm losing myself in details, but so I started by doing research in newspaper, and so I worked with Welsh newspaper in English because I don't speak Welsh. And here I'm giving you an example of the kind of results that came up when you put some keywords. Out of those, it looks like there's a lot, but a lot of that was probably more than half of articles on Black women were actually copies from American newspapers about what was going on in the US, and were concerning African American women and not local Black women. So those had to be discarded. And eventually I got the outcome was that 7 women came back more than twice in the news, and I had another 30 additional cases with a one-time appearance in the local news. So with those women, I try to gather more information from other sources, either online or in archives located in Cardiff. Next slide, please. So the first case was the case of Letitia. I found 30 articles on her. She was also appearing on a calendar of prisoners, which is on Ancestry. I found her marriage certificate. I found her on the census, and I found her husband's family tree. So you see the article, she's presented colored as Creole, which is not at all a British terminology, but more American, even more Louisiana or from the Caribbeans. Next slide, please. So I found out that Letitia was born in Birmingham, so not at all in Cardiff, but her father was a seaman and was Black. She was arrested 5 times in Cardiff and around Cardiff. The first time was for begging in 1889 when she was probably 16. And the way she's described in the article, she's described as a colored woman, but she's also described as a tramp, which is pretty harsh for a teenager. She was arrested several times for assault, but most of the charges were minor crimes around selling beer, and also keeping a disorderly house. Was that true or not? We will never know. But she was sentenced a couple of times. She did two months in 1894, 14 days the year after, and then 2 months in 1896. Eventually, we found her marriage certificate. So she got married with a seaman born in Barbados, sorry. Darnell Nathaniel. They got married at the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, so the church in Cardiff. And at the time, she was recorded as having no occupation. And they both signed their names, so she was able to read and write. The year after, she's listed in the 1901 census, living on David Street, so again in Tiger Bay. Interestingly, they were living with 2 Black boarders. One was from the West Indies. The other one was from North Carolina, United States. And the 3 men, so her husband was not a seaman anymore. And the 2 boarders were, the 3 men were coal miners. So they were working in the coal mine industry that was booming at the time in Wales. She died the year after at 26, so very young. A few years after, her husband appears in the news again. He was remarried to a white woman this time, and they were granted a license to open a boarding house in Tiger Bay. So it's interesting to see like the occupation of seamen, and he had boarders, and then he opens officially like a boarding house where seamen, probably Black seamen, were housed. Next slide. So that's how much I learned on Letitia. I decided to go to Cardiff to look at archives, hoping to find Letitia and other women that I had found in newspapers in paper archives, but I was not very lucky. But the most precious archive that I found was it's 5 volumes of fingerprint and photographic register from the Cardiff police. So the fingerprints are all missing, but the photographs are almost all there. And just quite good quality photographs for the time. So I worked with that. Unfortunately, I didn't find many of the women that I found in the newspaper in those archives or in other paper archives, jail or court, etc. I had made like a super spreadsheet, hoping like to, pinpoint where to find them, but dates don't correspond and things are not recorded, whatever. So I was not very lucky, but I found other Black women that I didn't find in the keyword research in the newspapers. Next slide. So this is an example of a woman that appeared in the police records, but I didn't find her in the keyword research first, and then after with her name, I was able to find articles about her. So one reason is because they're not always described as Black, but sometimes it's just a matter of how the article is written, right? So in this article, for instance, there's colored man, and there's also both are colored people, but I didn't do a research on colored men because I knew that it would be, a whole lot colored people. If I would put colored people, I would get mostly men, and I'm interested only in women who are a small portion of the Black population at the time. So the keyword research didn't her name didn't pop out with the keyword research, but then with her name found in the police archives, I was able to find more articles afterwards on her and her story. So Edith was charged with wounding, and she was discharged because she actually, so she allegedly she stabbed her husband. He was injured, not dead, but she was discharged for the simple reason that when the trial happened, the husband and also the witnesses were all working on a ship, so they were not in Cardiff. So she got off that way. And next slide, please. So I was able to find other stories on her. She was accused the year before the story with her husband. She was accused of wounding with another woman. And I also found another article on her husband was arrested for being drunk and disorderly on the railway. So it's interesting to see that, it seems like a lot of the accusations come for minor crimes. So of course it's very difficult without doing an exhaustive study to know how much more they were. For instance, they were targeted, harassed by police, targeted for those minor crimes. But there's an example at the end that kind of shows that a little bit. But my idea was not necessarily to prove anything, but more to find individuals and document their lives, because there's almost nothing written on Black women at that period. Next slide, please, Esmarie. So the third case is a woman that I actually found in the newspaper and also found in the police record. So she was charged several times with helping to run a disorderly house. And she also appeared a lot for being drunk and disorderly, using obscene language. In 1900, the newspaper article is about the fact that she made her 16th appearance for drunkenness and using obscene language. I'm just going to read a little bit of the article because I find it really interesting. Her plea was that since her return from Birmingham 3 months ago, not the same person than before. So apparently there was a circulation between Birmingham and Cardiff. Her plea was that since her return from Birmingham 3 months ago, she did not know what it was to lie in a bed. I get little food, she added, and when I get drink, I don't know what I do. The chairman, you can get drink, but you cannot at a bed. Prisoner, no, sir, I hardly know what it is to sleep in bed. The chairman remarked that he saw the prisoner drunk in Bute Street early in the afternoon. Her conduct was disgraceful. She was sentenced to 14 days imprisonment. And she also said, I scarcely ever had any food and a little drop of drink knocks me over. The counselor replied, you were on the A's, which was the near the docks, all the afternoon, marching up and down, tantalizing the police. You consume the expense of many a night's lodging in drink. You are committed to prison for 3 weeks. During, can we get to the next slide, please? During her incarceration at that occasion, so she was sentenced to 14 days, actually, not 3 weeks. She was charged for breaking a pane of glass in number 4 cell, Bute Street Station. So it's one of the only examples, really, because I was talking on at the very beginning on how I'm curious about how people resisted from the violence they get from state institution, and it's only that kind of little indication that there was some kind of resistance, because she broke the glass in the jail cell. Can you go to the next slide, please? I wanted to finish with that case. So it's not a woman, it's a man. But it's really interesting because he appears a lot. He appears several times in the police records and a lot of times in the newspapers as well, for different charges: stealing clothes, police assault, breaking and entering, desertion, living on earning of prostitution. And I think it was mostly that the police was trying to get him for living on earnings of prostitution. And articles, there's several articles about on him, and some of them suggest that his partner was white. So whether she was a sex worker or not, this is really not clear, because I didn't find anything on her being sentenced or charged for being a prostitute. But there were really on his case to prove that he was living from her sex work. And the article is super interesting because you see that there's 2 arrows showing Detective William Gooding stated that he had shadowed the prisoner for the past 3 months and had often seen the prisoner who had parted from his wife with a woman named Beatrice, blah, blah, blah. And later, another cop, Police Constable Joseph Reed, said that when nothing else occupied his mind, he followed William and saw him with the woman. So all of that is happening in that small, very small neighborhood, with a police station on Bute Street, which was the main street. And it seems that they didn't have much to do except following people and trying to find them guilty of anything. So his case is particularly interesting because he was even deported. Cardiff was the Cardiff police chief was really adamant about getting rid of foreigners. And they, even before alien acts were adopted, they were kind of already practicing deporting people. So he was deported to Lisbon in May 1910. And eventually he's arrested again. Sorry, I'm just going through my notes. Eventually he's arrested again in August 1910 in Cardiff. So he made his way back from Portugal to Cardiff. He was arrested, of course, for contravention of an expulsion order. But when he appeared in court, he proved his British status. He was, in fact, he was born in the West Indies, in St. Kitts. So he was a British subject all that time. Even so, they deported him to Portugal. I'm guessing they thought that he was from Angola or something. I don't know. So this man was arrested a bunch of times on a period of 5 years for different things. And obviously, like the police station on Beale Street was on his case, because they would follow him in the neighborhood and try to prove that that he was not working. He was too well dressed, and always clean and well dressed, so that was problematic in their eyes. And of course, he had to get his money somewhere, so they thought that he was living off his white partner's earnings from prostitution. So all those cases are just, individuals that pop up in archives, and it's what I find interesting is that in the newspapers and in the books that I saw in Cardiff, some individuals' names some individuals are named in stories, so they have connections to each other. So it's a bit like trying to find like the family tree of that community. But he also it gives a very, very small window to look at what was it to be a Black woman at the time. And I'm afraid that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much.
Unmute. Thank you very much for that, Natalie. That was fascinating. At this time, sorry, I'm going to stop sharing. I'll stop sharing. And I'll ask the audience members or participants to put their questions in the chat. I see that there's something in the chat already. Let's see what that could be. Maybe like everything. To write your questions in the chat. As a starting point, let me see what I can do here. I'll take the chair's prerogative and, well, apart from saying thank you for your fascinating presentation, and to also comment on the fact that on the back of your commentary about the difficulties of piecing together the information to create a full person, to ask you if you can comment on that a little bit, especially in regards to your first case example, Letitia, who was born in 1800s. And you mentioned previously at the beginning that Caroline Bressie has highlighted the racial erasures from the archives. And I've had similar experiences in speaking to archivists in my PhD who said, effectively the Black population started in Britain during the Windrush. So it's fascinating. And of course, I knew that wasn't the case at all, and pushed further research on that. But could you comment a little bit on Letitia's birth around the 1800s? And so this is before the First World War. So you mentioned a distinction between soldiers who were demobilized at the end of the First World War, but then there were traders previous to this who were trading in port towns and who would have come from what we now know to be the British Commonwealth.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Could you comment on her origins as to give a little bit of
Yeah.
social context for someone like
So,
her?
yeah, so it's really, so as you said, it's really hard to make a full individual out of those stories because it's only very, very small information that we can get. So she's born in around 1873. And her father was born in the West Indies. Um, they also have very common names, so that doesn't really help for, finding information on ancestry and stuff like that. Um, she there's no traces of her before that first arrest in Wales when she was around 16. So and she dies at 26. So there's a very, very short window of time where we can have anything. Um, and I think her husband was also was her husband, I think, was born in Barbados.
Right, your brother, there you go.
Um, but we have no idea who her mother was or siblings. I didn't find any other information on her family. She's accused at some point of stabbing someone who was uh, the same names as her father, so it might be her brother. I don't know. Uh, but so there's not much information, but my guess is because it's a story that comes back in several Black women that I found, that their father was an African or Caribbean seaman, or even African American sometimes, because uh, I know in Liverpool there's a big there's probably more West African than people from the Caribbean at the turn of the 20th century, before the Windrush generation. But in Cardiff, it seems like people were really coming from all around the globe. Tiger Bay was home for more than 50 nationalities. There was a Yemeni grocery store, an Egyptian coffee shop, and so people would form families mostly with white women because they were locals, and all those children would congregate together in the neighborhood.
Thank you for that. Kira Malloy has a question in the chat. Kira, did you want to read out your question to Natalie?
Yeah,
Hello.
perfect. Thanks, Mil Esmery. And thank you so much, Natalie, for a fascinating talk. Sorry if you can hear a bit of background noise behind me, apologies. But I just had one or two questions about that fascinating case of Edith G. That you mentioned, and the term coloured was coming out in newspapers at the time. Was it just used in a descriptive sense, or was there a very deliberate effort by journalists at the time to align race and criminality? I'm just wondering as well about that fascinating intersection of imperialism, race, class, and gender, which are quite complex links as well, and to what extent you've brought a colonial criminology framework into your analysis so far.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, from what I saw, so it's your question is a bit about representation of race in the media, right? When I talked about the number of articles that I got from those keywords, and the fact that there was a lot of clippings actually that were exact reproduction from American newspaper. And I was quite shocked because, well, I was not expecting that, but a lot of the news about Africa, a lot of the articles about African American women were really, really racist. It was, jokes that would be published that were published in racist white newspapers in the United States, and they were reproduced with the same, exactly the same in the Welsh newspapers. So this part is kind of, clear that it's pretty negative and pretty racist. But a lot of the articles that I found on Black women locally, the use of colored, I think, was not necessarily tinted, or, I mean, not necessarily used negatively, but used as a description. But they were not always described as colored or Black or Creole or um, uh, sometimes like this, and it's really hard when those surnames are really common, of course, because you're not always sure it's the same person. But when the surnames are really different, or I mean really specific, then you can be almost sure that it's the same individuals. And sometimes individuals would be described as Black in an article, but not described at all in another one, which is a contrast from the research I've done in the United States, where it's crystal clear. If there's no description, the person is white. And if the person is not white, there's always a description of color. Always, always, always. So that was a bit of a surprise. And also, how you what's the list of keywords you can use, because Ethiopian, for instance, was used to describe Black people, whether they were from Ethiopia or even from Africa, that no importance. The use of Ethiopian was kind of there to mark the race, but not as a geographical origin. So there's all sorts of things, whether they were used to emphasize the criminal aspect of Blackness or not. It's a bit difficult. But the example that was really striking was the case of Ellen, because Ellen is described as one of the first article when she appeared. She's described as a lady of color, but it seems a bit like how do you say, sarcastic to call her a lady, because she's described as wearing bricks, so wearing pants, and she's charged with obstructing the thoroughfare, so the traffic on the street. And the article goes on and on describing her as a new woman, which at the time meant like a woman who dressed as a man, or it was even before the 1920s, right? It was 1896. So the new woman was a woman who would have a bicycle, for instance, like kind of push the boundaries of gender. The article is interesting. Ellen was the source of illimitable delight to a crowd of about 100 persons on account of her novel makeup. The stern myrmidons of the law, however, were as hard as adamant towards the joke, blah, blah, blah. So she was arrested. Later on, she's arrested with her sister. And she's described a well-bronzed complexion and ebony hair, glossy and luxuriant as tropical vegetation. That's the most obvious, like, kind of, stereotypical racist descriptions that I found on anybody. So instead of appearing very masculine, it's the opposite in that article. She wore a loose, fluffy kind of blouse with lace insertions about the neck, as the fashion puff writer says. so she's arrested for being disorderly, but they really comment on her appearance as so they comment on her complexion and her hair, but also on her dress. Her rigs out suggested that she was about to sing at a grand evening concert. So again, very sarcastic. It seems that it's an individual that really got arrested a lot, all the time for being drunk and disorderly. But I think also the fact that she smashed the window, it seems like there was some kind of the police saw her as being a provocation in herself, and would, not appreciate that and would harass her for that. So maybe your attitude was a bit more of a resistance than others, but so it's very, very, very different from one case to another, the way that they describe the person. But I think her example really shows that, yeah, there's obviously a racist understanding of what it is to be a Black woman, what you should be looking and not. So to answer your question, sorry.
Thank you for that question.
It was a bit long, but a bit long and confusing, but it's hard for me to draw conclusions because it's just, a few stories, not that many. So, but for sure there's something there.
Thank you for that. I think it was building on Kira's question, and having read other historians, including Lucy Bland, who I'm sure you've come across. One of the things that Bland highlighted in reference to your comparison with the descriptors between the States and the UK, between the US and the UK, Bland stressed that what seemed to be the case historically in Britain was that there seemed to be a concerted attempt to limit the number of public policies that were written that were anti-Black or that were clearly racially oriented in Britain itself. So whilst, for instance, in the US, miscegenation was illegal, there was the one drop rule that says if you had one drop of Black blood, you were Black no matter what you looked like, and therefore that fed into practice and policy. In the UK, that was only done in the colonies. So in the colonies, there were clear rules that said there clear legislation that says no interaction, no sexual interaction, no intimate interaction between Black or racialized men and a white European woman. This was not done in the UK. So what you see is an element of social policing. So this as part of the broader explanation for the riots, which occurred in 1919, the idea that there was sexual jealousy, economic jealousy, and the working class men were returning from war and found that their women were being enticed by these beastly foreigners who were massive competition. Actually, in Athena, I'm really sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name a little bit, but I'll give it a try. Stafila? Did you want to ask her question of Natalie?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello. Did you find something, Natalie, about differences in criminal punishment between Black women and white women for the same criminal act, or Black women versus men, Black men and white men for same criminal act at that time in Cardiff? It would be very interesting, I think, if we could have that, so we can see the differences, the racial treatments. Of course, the main thing is naturally all that the social punishment of women that betting without license. This is ridiculous. I mean, it's a society that marginalizes by making criminals. people, they are not accepted. They come from outside, they are the outsiders, and they find every day something small to make them a criminal record that is for them then a great last to find a normal job. The society criminalizes and drops out the people from regular way of life. But my question is that the differences in punishments, if you find something.
Well, unfortunately, like the way that I conducted my research doesn't allow me to draw those kind of conclusions, because I would have to, have an exhaustive view on how many Black women there is in the penal system, how many white women there is in the penal system, what kind of offenses they are charged with, and then the punishment, the sentences given to them. So I cannot at all answer that question, and I guess you would have to to be someone else who comes and bring it further. But the biggest challenge is to identify all individuals coming from visible minorities, because there's no way in the records, the court records, the police records, or the prison records, to really do that job, because there's no recording of race or ethnicity. So I cannot answer your question, but I know there's lots of people who work, for instance, on Irish women, and we show that Irish women were particularly targeted by the police, and arrested and institutionalized a lot, especially, for instance, in Liverpool, where, of course, we're so close from Ireland that there's a big Irish population. And so records, for instance, are very precise when it comes to Irish women. They always find a way to specify that. But so though it would be, my ultimate objective would be to do that, but I haven't found a way yet to be able to do that job.
I was going to say that the part of this informs part of my approach to this research, this historical research. My focus is never really on criminal justice alone. My focus has been on the way that everyday life, as Athena has pointed out, that the society criminalizes just by your presence. So I move between the archival documentation and sort of literature. So, for instance, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Nadifa Mohammed. I know you can't say this properly, but Nadifa Mohammed is a British novelist, and she's written a few pieces of work, but one of her most recent work is called The Fortune Men, and she focuses on Cardiff and Tiger Bay in particular. And the one of the main subjects of her book is a Black character who comes to Cardiff as a result of trade, and also that colonial relationship. And in this sort of exposition of how this man, she describes him as someone who, in his photos when he arrives, looks strong and powerful and handsome, and by the time he's incarcerated and he dies, he's like it hasn't been very many years, but he's a shadow of himself. And in the larger societal descriptions that she manages to cobble together from the archives, what she finds is that the criminalization of leisure, it was quite dominant, the criminalization of your presence in everyday life. So normalized things like the raiding of cafes where certain populations or demographics congregated to socialize, to have a drink, to meet with friends, to have a nice time. And also the thing you pointed out about one of the I think the husband who was accused of procurement or of being a pimp, that he was well dressed, and that in and of itself indicates something exceptional, because to be well dressed would imply, for in a common sense way, someone who was potentially a productive member of society, potentially someone who was on their way to doing something good. In a time where we were talking about imperial leather and soap and light, where this idea of hygiene was highly controversial, in the sense that working class people were accused of being dirty. And so the aim to be clean seemed quite basic to us now, but it was quite important at that time. So to be described as and to be criminalized for
Because
looking
it's too
well,
clean.
yeah, for looking well, is an indication of the sort of exceptionality or paradoxes in the way that we are the justice officials in that time observed or racialized certain activities. So I think that I don't think we necessarily need to look at disproportionate incarceration. I think one of the things that we can do is sort of a differentiated or comparative study between how ideas around leisure and social life are approached. So the woman who's described as being a new woman, that's not a compliment. It's a loaded categorization.
Critic.
It's a label that attracts quite negative attention. That it implies a sort of surveillance that's quite nefarious. So yes, I think from the outset, you're by virtue of being present, you are an outsider and you're criminalized for it. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Whether it was worse than being an Irish woman, I don't know. But you know, I think my point was to say that there's not only Irish women who were criminalized at the time. There were also other people, and then to show that they appear also in penal institutions. But I think it's very hard to trace clearly continuities and affiliations between, for instance, colonial policing as it was done in the British Empire and what happened in the UK itself at the same period of time. So my objective was to, you know, contribute to that demonstration by providing some examples, but of course it's just a small contribution to the work that has to be done on the subject.
Can I ask, is that why you take the approach to, can I say, fictionalize some of your work? So you not graphic novels are part of your outputs when you write. Could you comment on why you've chosen that mode of exposition?
Yeah, so I've worked with an American illustrator on a story on a Black sex worker in New Orleans I've been working on that for the last 10 years, so big project. But anyway, but yeah, I think it's interesting to use this kind of approach, either, you know, novel or a graphic novel or a movie or some sort of fiction, because you need to fill the blanks in the archives if you want to, you know, have a full individual in front of you, a full story to tell. There's you know, part you can get from newspaper, from reading records, etc. But there's a part you have to imagine from also the knowledge of the context that you get from other lives, and you can, you know, kind of uh, need needs a story like that.
Interweave. Well, thank you very much for that. Guys, do we have any more questions for Nathalie? Or shall we wrap up and say goodbye for now? Thank you again for joining and for sharing your questions with us. Oh, might have another message. Susan says thank you. Thank you to Susan for joining us today. Thanks, Athena, Kiara, Tahani. Your presence as usual is very, very welcome. Thanks so much. Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much to everybody.
Our next talk will be Julian Go, and I will send out the announcements. If you can make it, that would be really wonderful. But it'll be.
And I think it's gonna, if I can insist on attending that talk next week, because Julian has worked on the affiliations between police forces, the London Met and US police forces, and kind of, you know, tells a story of how imperial policing influenced policing
In the metropole.
in the metropole, and also the links between, you know, slavery and the creation of police forces in the United States. So his story, I think, is I mean, his work is really, really interesting. I heard him before, and
Yeah.
it's worth coming.
It's always worth coming, Nathalie. Thank you, guys. Did you want to stick around for 5 minutes, Nathalie? Thank you very much, guys. I will.
No, thank you.
Thanks so much. Carnival.
Bye.
Ooh, let me stop the recording. I have a bad habit of not